Hello, I'm David Morris and welcome back to Risk. This is episode 5. Now, risk in the 2020s is increasingly understood to mean threats. We're imagining the world as this zero-sum black and white place between goodies and baddies again, rather like people thought in the Cold War days or back in the 1930s. Is that really an accurate description of our world that's so interconnected and so globalised today? I don't believe it is, and that's why in my book that I'm reading from today and commenting on, I start in this section to talk about taking a political risk approach, the approach that as a political risk consultant I would take in advising businesses on doing business in an international environment. I think the political risk approach helps us to understand the changing world better than some of the, or many of the academic theories and many of the think tanks. And after all, you have to look at who's funding the think tanks and why they're telling us these fundamentalist, ideological, black and white answers. Actually, it's a bit more complicated. So let's talk today about political risk. In taking a political risk approach, we seek to observe how international actors view dynamic circumstances and develop proportionate risk management strategies to avoid threats, to minimise vulnerabilities, and to position themselves to maximise opportunities according to their own circumstances and goals. Skepticism of theory is not unique to me, but it's commonly found amongst business people, diplomats, and others active on the ground in a changing international environment. Today's problem of a shifting world order is that theories developed to describe earlier international systems may make snappy headlines, but they may not fit the new conditions. China is potentially a new kind of major power, and it may act differently from other major powers, or indeed, it may follow a similar path. At this point, it's impossible to predict. Further, there is a diversity of actions, actors, impacts and experiences in China's interactions with the world. In this environment of rapid change, it appears the popular discourse may be constructing certainty where there is uncertainty, and confrontation and possible conflict where there is complexity and perhaps still space for competitive cooperation. History is messy and is not necessarily as efficient as theoretical models. Indeed, the external environment might not always shape the outcome. The asymmetrically more powerful might not always prevail, despite the assumptions of much of the academic literature that originates, after all, from the big powers, the big established powers. Institutions, rules, and norms do not always develop in a straight line. Humans crave models that will easily explain complex and unpredictable phenomena. International relations theories look for patterns in the interplay between states, but there may be many other dynamics at play, including domestic politics, economics, technological change, all in the context of unprecedented global challenges, such as climate change and the shift in global power from a small number of countries to a much larger number of countries, to larger population centres, still developing and growing. We just don't know yet how the new multipolar world will play out. The triumphalist liberal narrative of the end of history. Remember Francis Fukuyama, 1992, he claimed history had ended. Liberal democracy was going to prevail everywhere, liberalism. This was a fantastic ideological theory, but it didn't quite fit the conditions of what was really happening. It's a case in point for how inadequate the prevailing theoretical assumptions for a changing world have been. History did not end. Indeed, liberal triumphalism has been overtaken by a new, more pessimistic, but equally dogmatic geopolitical threat narrative, which is also, I believe, unlikely to age well. Conditions can change and are changing. The current uncertainty is greater because the rising power represents a completely different set of civilizational values and political, economic and social organisation. This research that I did for this book was therefore undertaken in an earnest attempt to maintain a critical scepticism of both theory and major power narratives, while assessing rich case study information on how multiple and diverse actors understand and interact with the risks that lie between opportunities and risks. The new China threat narrative, normatively embedded across the Western liberal and realist international relations literature in the last decade, creates a paradox for states, for firms, and for communities that are interdependent with both the US and China. Actors, including states, are assumed to face a simplistic binary choice to either submit to Chinese power or to decouple from China. Neither appears to me to be realistic. No state power and few international organisations or multinational businesses can be expected to choose to submit to a new hegemony. Indeed, China remains significantly outweighed, even in Asia, by the US allies, and China's other strategic rivals. So such a narrative of likely Chinese hegemony appears to be misleading. Neither do most actors appear likely to decouple from China's vast market, despite US pleas, with only a handful of its most loyal allies following US pleas to block Chinese investment and technology and to potentially pay a high economic price for such decisions. It appears more likely that most actors will independently assess their own goals and develop proportionate strategies for risk management and mitigation. Yet the strategic agency of actors, other than the major powers, is underexplored in the international relations literature. The interviews that I did for this book were therefore largely with people at the coalface, stakeholders and actors managing or responding to actual, local, relevant and emerging issues at the time of dueling major power narratives and uncertainty. Most nations have actually not defined China as a strategic competitor, as did Trump's United States in 2017. Most countries have maintained a more nuanced hedging and balancing strategy. And most firms have not decoupled from Chinese value chains, while many may nevertheless choose to diversify away from over-dependence on China over time. The political risk approach provides a useful framework of analysis to comprehend this complexity and uncertainty. It will not please those who prefer certainty and a simple division of the world into good and bad actors. Beck's risk society, as he called it, recognised that the change and uncertainty inherent in modernity demands a methodology that can identify and address risks. Indeed, Chinese decision makers place great emphasis on risk prevention, which makes the political risk approach in this research that I did for this book particularly relevant, I believe, in seeking to understand also how Chinese actors too may assess and manage risks. In the face of geopolitical, economic, technological and other disruptions, China's political class, despite its official Marxist-Leninist narratives, features a predominance of engineers and other scientists who commonly exhibit understanding of the principle of quantum mechanics, that the world is uncertain. Liu identifies 4 key risks in today's risk society. First, globalization spreads at speed and distance, meaning that, second, risks are no longer just market, micro or local risks, but they become public, macro and long-term, manifesting as, third, unbounded, intangible and insensible risks proliferating that are difficult to measure by a true-false dichotomy. And finally, relations between the state and the market and the market and society are no longer demarcated as before, and rules no longer function as they did before. So risk analysis is therefore likely to be a rich field for understanding how states and actors are negotiating an uncertain, changing world. For China itself, the Belt and Road Initiative and its geo-economic interdependence strategies might be understood as managing its own risks and addressing its own vulnerabilities as a resource-constrained nation with historic fears of being isolated by the West. For the world beyond China, on the other hand, the Belt and Road Initiative and the new geo-economic environment of interdependence that it creates will generate new kinds of risks, including geopolitical risks for states, businesses and communities as matters of global power balance, the nature of the Chinese party state, financial and economic power, new transformative technologies, trade routes and strategic infrastructure are all in play. These risks lie between opportunities on the one hand and threats on the other, which is a schematic framework that I'll use later in this book. As noted above, in the context of the geopolitical contest that's underway and the rising uncertainty, risks are being generalised. And in the context of prevailing narratives of fear and blame, they're often catastrophised and redefined as threats. Assumptions of international relations discourse that the actions of international actors follow predictable patterns underlie normative certainties in the face of actually more likely uncertainty. Neither the popular narratives of fear and blame nor the threat discourse in the international relations literature is sufficiently grounded in empirical observation, however, to delineate between risks and threats. A more nuanced range of strategies is applied by most actors, compared with the binary choices predominant in the literature, and public media discussion about international relations, which is so simplistic. This is the reason for taking a political risk approach here in my research, to probe the risks that lie between opportunities and threats that may indeed be mitigated with appropriate strategies, or which, of course, the alternative is they may escalate to become threats as a result of pursuing inappropriate strategies. A political risk approach can help to understand how actors analyse, assess, forecast and subsequently manage the risks of the next phase of globalisation and the contemporary deteriorating geopolitical environment. The approach is selected here to avoid superimposing a theory from the international relations literature and to seek a more holistic approach to understand the unique dynamics at play. Indeed, as an international practitioner over decades, I observe that political risk mirrors the kind of multidisciplinary, forward-looking analysis that governments, through their diplomatic and intelligence networks, and businesses, through their iterative scanning of the business environment and drawing upon expert advice, undertake to seek understanding in conditions of uncertainty, to develop strategic options, to benefit from opportunities, and to minimise losses by managing, mitigating or avoiding risks. The value of scenario planning in understanding risks in the international system was underlined by the seismic discontinuities and potential shifts across multiple fields of activity generated by the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 underlined the failure of the international community to cooperate in the face of crisis, demonstrating that only national states hold the levers of power, able to enforce measures such as protecting public health and targeted economic interventions to support affected populations. On the other hand, climate change looms as a challenge that only international cooperation will be able to address, and continued failure to do so might be expected to generate in future even greater seismic discontinuities in the international system. Comprehending likely and consequential risks will be critically important for actors to plan for and to respond to the uncertainties ahead. Now, I might leave it there because there's a lot of academic language there, but I hope that this has been a useful introduction to this idea of using risk as an approach, because risks can be managed. If they're not managed, of course, they might escalate into threats, but developing our strategies for a changing international world, I believe, requires risk analysis, and that's why, as I continue reading this book, we'll talk some more about applying risk to specific case studies and to geopolitical risk in particular.